Today I'm going to talk about script options. These are options you set at the test script level. And they typically, most of the options show up if you highlight the very first line of the script. You'll see a general tab which discusses common options, security options, performance requirements, and HTTP options, which are probably the most important. There's also an advanced tab which shows error handling and response time breakdown. In addition, some script options show up on the individual lines of the script, on the page name, where you name the page that you're fetching. There's an advanced tab that shows some performance requirements and error handling. And on specific HTTP requests on the advanced tab, there's a number of different options, including client-side processing delay that shows up there. So I'm going to go through the script options in some detail. First of all, the common options screen. It shows up when you click the very first line of a script, and it's on the General tab. And it shows you your data pools that the script uses. And it shows how they're used, and it shows where they're used. And it also shows if they're not used. And if they're not used at all, you can delete them. You can delete, for example, user data is not used anywhere in this script. So I could just delete it. Another place this comes up useful is when you launch a schedule and you have conflicting usage of a data pool. This can help you find and change where you're using an access method that's different in one fragment than another. Looking at the security options, if you're using digital certificates or Kerberos for authentication, you would set that up here on this screen. I have not used it myself, so I can't get into any details on this, but just so you know that if you are using digital certificates or Kerberos, you would set it up here. The Performance Requirements tab shows the requirements that are defined any place in the script. You can't define options from here, but you can modify them. If you double click on any of the highlighted lines, then you'll get to the point where you can edit the particular setting. For example, average response time per page, instead of saying less than or equal, says is 1,000 milliseconds. And so if I double click on that, it'll take me to the search one page name, and from there I can edit. From this screen I can clear all the requirements if I need to. The HTTP options are probably the most important, so I'll discuss them one at a time. The timeout action and the timeout value, I just usually take the defaults, so you're probably okay just going with the defaults. Clear cookie cache when a test starts. Typically, if you have a set of fragments that are being executed one after the other in a group, in a schedule, you want the cookie cache emptied when the first fragment executes and not emptied when the second, third, and fourth fragments execute. So what you would do is you would clear the cookie cache when the test starts for the first fragment, and you would uncheck that for the subsequent fragments so that they would share cookies that the first fragment fetched. And the first fragment would start as a new user, so the cookie cache would be empty. And don't forget to set this. Every time you record a new script, you need to go through this and set this. Clear page cache and disable page cache. RPT will simulate a browser cache. You can completely disable it by disabling it, that checkbox here. Or you can clear the page cache when the test starts, and typically this is similar to the cookie cache. The first fragment in a set of fragments, you would clear the page cache, so each user starts with a clear cache, and then in subsequent fragments you would not clear it, so that subsequent fragments would use the browser cache starting with the first fragment. Now there are times where you want to simulate a warm page cache, and so in that case you would never clear the page cache. But be aware when you're doing that, because your script will behave much differently if you don't clear the page cache for each user as it iterates to the start of the group. Okay, let me discuss playback speed. The default is normal right in the middle. And what that means is that RPT will play back browser delays as recorded. So if you record your script on a very slow computer and your browser is very slow, RPT, when it plays back a mouse click, will play back the browser's processing time. So for example, if you have one mouse click that fetches 5 elements, and the browser spends a lot of time doing processing between the first and second elements, spends a half a second. When you play back a schedule with this script fragment in it, you will never get less than half a second response time. And we're not typically interested in having RPT simulate the browser, because that's going to be different on different machines. On faster machines, we'll have less think time than on slow machines. So what we typically do is set the HTTP request delay to the shortest possible, which is what I show it here. And when you do that, you get a warning that says sometimes things can get messed up if you do this. And typically what could get messed up is things could get fetched out of order. So if page element 2 has some embedded URLs in it that are needed to fetch element 3, if you don't have any delays, it might try to fetch those in parallel, and it won't have the URL. So that's what this new client processing delays are about. If you enable new client processing delays, RPT takes into account the dependencies that page elements have on each other, and it will make sure that if element 3 has a URL that's come from element 2, that element 2 is fetched before element 3 is. That's what that new client processing delay is about. So these are the settings that we typically use. Let me show you secondary request behavior. There are times, if you click the button, Modify Secondary Request Behavior, you are taken to this screen. And there are times where you don't want to fetch the embedded images that are in a page. And the most common case is when you want to simulate an outboard caching proxy, but you don't have one. You can say disable the fetching of all secondary requests, because they'll be served from a caching proxy. They'll be fast. They won't put a load on the server that you're actually wanting to test. And so the easiest way to determine how a caching proxy will behave is to disable all secondary requests. And that way RPT, it makes it look like it comments out the secondary requests in your script. And I've done some experiments with the caching proxy and without them, and the response times pretty much are accurately reflected by simulating a caching proxy by disabling secondary requests. And you can get more specific on what you are enabling or disabling, and you can come back here again if you want to change it back. You can just uncheck it. Now let's look at Advanced tab on Script Options, and it shows error handling. Error handling options can be defined at every level of the script. It can be defined on the top line of the script for the whole script. It can be defined on the pages, the individual pages. It can be defined on the page elements. However, I suggest you don't set any of the error handling at the script level. Set it at the schedule level. And I have another lecture about setting error handling at the schedule level. You should see that. The response time breakdown locations I don't have experience with, but you can use RPT as a profiling tool, and that's response time breakdown, and this has to do with setting that up. And I don't know how to do it, so I'm not going to tell you more details, but only to tell you that the possibility exists if you want to do that. More test script line options. This is on a particular script element. You can set always log details, which I discussed in another lecture. It's useful for debugging. You can set performance requirements. Do that here. I don't really see why you don't do it on the script element. You want to do it on the page name. You can set error handling here as well. And you can do data transform. If you have to transform certain elements, RPT supports and built-in transforms. Haven't used them myself. There's certain data transforms that RPT handles automatically for you, so look for those here. And then there's also this client processing delay, which this is the new client processing delay. And basically what it says is this element has a dependency on the wait for element, and release it when the first character is received. I would typically release it when the last character is received if you're going to be doing this, but I don't think it matters with the way we set the overall delays to 0. This will just work just fine, I'm told. It hasn't given us any problems. But if you really want to wait for the previous page, you can wait for the first character, the last character, a number of other options, and you can say the additional delay to wait. This is what was recorded. Like I say, typically we just want to wait the smallest amount of time possible, and that's why we pull that slider to 0, and that overrides this, and it keeps the dependencies in place. So to review all the script options, there's the options that show up when you highlight the very first line of the script, the common options, security options, performance requirements, most importantly HTTP options. On the advanced tab it shows you error handling and response time breakdown. Some options show up on the individual lines of the script, on the page name, on the specific HTTP requests.